everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another video. This is Prickly Hedgehog, and today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to take you through one of the more important procedures in combat flying, and that is air-to-air refueling. It's one of the most important skills that, well, Naval and Air Force pilots need to learn if they want to stay in the game. And oftentimes you'll find that in real life, during missions, air-to-air refueling is actually slotted in just so that pilots can get practice with it. And that probably sounds pretty sucky to most DCS pilots because it's a process that they'd rather skip. It's frustrating, it's challenging, and after about 5 minutes of jousting with the hose, well, it's more fun to go and do something else, like shooting down the tanker pilot who's clearly flying like a complete wanker, especially if I can't tank. Now the reality is this, as I said, just like carrier landings, it's challenging in real life too. So don't be too harsh on yourself if you've never successfully plugged into the tanker. Stick around, this video might be for you. Over the last few weeks, I've been practicing this skill as well as formation flying with Juice and other members of the air warfare group. And within just a few lessons and some minor and major adjustments to my throttle controls, I'm having much more success with this important skill. Before we begin, I need to establish a couple of caveats. I'm not a real pilot. The information contained in this video is not exhaustive on the topic. It's likely only applicable to the DCS world environment, and we'll be using the Eagle Dynamics version of the A-18C module, so you will need that. And I'm using the controls for the Thrustmaster HOTAS with the A-10C joystick, which also doubles as the F-16s. Now, I want to suggest taking a screenshot of your current numbers or control numbers in your Axes commands as a reference point should you need to go back to them after this, or if you want to make a comparison between the two and do some fine tuning before you make any adjustments from the video that you're going to watch. Remember also, once you've made changes, you're going to need to take some time learning some new muscle memory, as these settings will feel unfamiliar and will require some practice, therefore getting used to them. It's something I recall from my iRacing days where people would throw on somebody else's user setup for a race and actually have a qualifying setup for a full race and then would run into problems or not have enough experience with that setup and how it behaves and handles. They just hadn't given themselves enough time to get used to those settings, and that would cause problems in a real race. So again, take some time to learn that and see if it works for you, and it may take several minutes to get up to speed with it. Alright, let's move to step one, which is setting up our Axes controls and commands.
That very quickly becomes quite dangerous.
Right, oh yeah. Alright, so let's get into it. Find the settings menu for the A-18C sim aircraft in the drop-down menu on the left, and then select it. Once there, we're looking for Axes commands in the settings, and we're looking therefore next for the X and Y commands, also known as the pitch and roll commands on your joystick. These are actually going to be the same, so should be an easy adjustment. And once you've highlighted the control axes, then click on the Axis Tune button to access the Tune panel. Now if you look at the image here, you can see the settings that we have. Right now we have a dead zone of 3, the saturation is set at 100%, and the contour is set to 10. So go ahead and set both the X and Y axis with the above settings, and then we can move on to the next step, which is your throttle controls, which are also really going to help. So you'll notice here in the image that we've got a little bit more of a radical departure from the default settings. We have a dead zone of 0, 98 for the X saturation, 100 for the Y, and rather than set to a curve, of course, it's very important because this is a slider, it's set to a slider, and we've implemented here a modified user curve. If you notice, there's actually a fairly flat portion of that slider's curve in the image, and this is the area where it's kind of a sweet spot for our formation flying, where we want very predictable and smooth inputs from the throttle. And typically when we're cruising like that, we're going to be around about 350 KIAS, or knots indicated airspeed. Now if we didn't have this, the aircraft is probably going to be twitchy, it may be too responsive. When in that area of the throttle we want more gentle inputs of those throttle controls. We don't want to have radical departures from our speed, And this is obviously critical then for our formation flying and naturally refueling. In fact, you'll often hear people say, if you can formation fly, then you have that ability to refuel because you're basically flying in formation with the tanker. It's an accurate statement. So the settings for the user curve here are 0, 5, 10, 25, 35, 42, 49, 56, 64, 75, and 100. Don't forget to click OK before exiting and OK again to save the changes you've made to the axes commands. Once you've saved those, now we can move to the next step, which is part 2 of the video, finding the tanker and then flying in formation with it, which would be the last part of the video, so stay tuned.
Technique. So if that winder is moving forwards towards the nose of my aircraft, you're getting further behind. If it's moving back, you're getting
right,
further.
So now that we're in the game, we have to be able to communicate with the tanker, which if you bring up your briefing menu, hopefully you should have the appropriate frequencies listed so you know which channel they're on to communicate with them and signal our intent to refuel with them. And also we have to be able to find them, and of course we could just hit the F10 button and try to, you know, very crudely fly ourselves to the tanker, but that's a very inaccurate and clumsy way of doing it. And with the F-18 we've got all these fantastic systems and avionics that can help us find this tanker in the air very, very easily, and we can use the TACAN channel, which in this case is 39X, and I'll show you how to plug that in. Alright, so we're now out of the clouds, which gives us a little bit better situational awareness. We really don't want to have our head down in the cockpit for extended periods of time while we're in the clouds, because that will lead to disorientation. And we now need to both talk to the tanker, and like I said, we need to find it with the TACAN system. Now if you're having trouble, this is overwhelming while you're flying, and you don't want to use the active pause, there's a nice way of doing that. If we hit the auto throttle, and now I don't have to muck around with the throttle. This is a pretty stable speed for us. And then if I go to the autopilot, and if I get the aircraft basically level, just with a little bit of input there, now I can take my hands off, and like I said, this is a more realistic way of using the aircraft rather than the active pause, because I can still play around here and I still have situational awareness and I'm not being overwhelmed by other tasks I'm trying to do. So, like I said, the tanker needs to be communicated with. In this case it was 251. What's the frequency there? So it should be, I think it's 18 on this particular map that we have it set up as. Obviously you could plug it in manually as well by just typing in and hitting the enter button and adjusting the frequency that way. So now we're set to the appropriate frequency so we can talk to the tanker. But we also don't know where the tanker is. We're getting some data link information, but we're not entirely sure where the tanker is. So the TACAN is going to help us find it much more easily than, say, hitting the F10 button and trying to fly there in a very crude and clumsy manner, as I said before. So TACAN is going to be much more precise, and it's very easy to set up. Hit the TACAN button, turn it on, we should see that there, and we know that the frequency is 39X. See there, and we also want it air to air, and we're going to hit enter. And now you can see this little carrot, if you like, a little triangle shape here on the outside of our compass rose. We know that the tanker is actually behind us, and if we want a little bit more information, it's probably going to be hard to see on this. Let's see if we can get a little bit more gain and contrast here. Okay. There is, you can't see it here probably, but TACAN is there as well. If I hit that button on the MFD, now it's going to show us where the tanker is in terms of distance. So it's about 20 miles away from us. We're flying at almost 350 knots. The tanker's probably going to be doing about 250 or something like that. So we're flying almost 100 knots faster than the tanker. So let's do this. Let's bring up the menu and talk to the tanker and find out what height and what speed it is. Remember, it's make sure you choose the right tanker.
Texaco 1-1 in field 1-2. Request rejoin.
In field 1-2, Texaco 1-1. Proceed to pre-contact at 15,000 at 260.
Okay, so the tanker's at 15,000 feet and it's moving at 260 knots, which is obviously a lot slower than us, and as you can see we're still moving away from it. So what we're going to have to do now is turn around and make sure that we are deconflicted. So we do that if we don't have sight of the tanker. What we can do is fly at around about 1,000 feet below, so in this case it'll be 14,000 feet. And when we find it visually, we can bump that up to just, we'll actually reduce that I should say, drop that down to about 500 feet to again avoid deconfliction. And then we'll try and line up on the left hand side of the tanker in preparation for pre-contact approval. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so I now have visual on the tanker. There's a couple of things we need to do now that we have visual. Obviously we can bump up our height a little bit to around about 14.5 if he's flying at 15,000 feet. We also need to silence our radar, and we also need to turn on or activate the probe. As I turn down there, of course, to look down, I immediately lost visual, so we'll just have to reacquire here. There he is. And we've got to watch our closing speed. Once you can start seeing detail, and what I'm referring to here is the engines or the nacelles, those kinds of things, then you can start really bleeding off that speed. So we need to gain a little bit more height here. We're about 1,000 feet below where I'd like to be. Only 1,500 feet, really. So let's bring it up here. So closing in here. Once we're about 3 miles away, we can really... we'll have to start dialing back on that speed. We're on about 50 knots of overtaking speed. If we have more than that, we're just going to overshoot. And the other reason we need to be underneath the tanker is if we're too high, then we may end up getting a lot of wake turbulence. Sucks. And I see a lot of this when you first start to learn to fly tanking. You're just not in the right position, and of course once you hit that wake turbulence, then the aircraft becomes much harder to control, and got pretty high closing speed right now, so they're gonna have to really dial this back. But I just want to get here. So, like I said, once you start seeing details on the aircraft, such as the engines, the nacelles, and things like that, then you know you need to start dialing back that speed. We're getting pretty close to that point now, so we are really rocketing along here. We're in great danger of overshooting here, so I have to be very cognizant of that. Start dialing back that speed a little bit. And that really is a science in its own right, is measuring that. But you can see how handy it is to have that track to know how far away I am. So we're going to dial back the speed here. If he's doing 260, I had well over 100 knots closing speed. But it's really nice having that distance if you're not able to affirm it with the eye. It does take some practice. So now we've probably got about 50 knots of closing speed here. We can just adjust that throttle again, just push ourselves a little bit closer. Take your time here. Again, looking to stay off the nose here. Now this is a new technique that I've learned and I've seen from other members of the air warfare group, particularly DCS debrief, talking about rolling on and rolling off. And every time you move, you want to do the opposite control input. So if I roll to the left here, I'm going to roll back. You can see how much the nose moves just with a little bit of roll on, roll off like that. So we don't want to roll and then find the point that we are looking for, because otherwise very quickly you'll go well beyond the area that you're trying to move to. So again, fine adjustments, roll on, roll back off again. Looking pretty good here, maybe a fraction high, but we are closing here at a useful rate. It's very, very easy to just simply overshoot. Now the reason we want the probe out early is we want to be able to depressurize the tanks, the external tanks. As you can see, we're right on top of it now. We're really getting some good detail, so we're going to bump back our speed here. Depressurizing the tanks takes about 3 to 5 minutes. Otherwise they won't accept fuel. So we're about half a mile out here now, so again, start bleeding off some speed here. You see how quickly it happens and how you have to be cognizant of that. So we're going to dial back here. Let's bump it back. It's a little hard to hear the engine. I like to be able to hear my engine because it is difficult. And we're just bumping the speed here a little bit. We're going to cruise in here. So when I say bump, if you find a point on your throttle where your aircraft is stable and we're not gaining or we're not really falling behind, what we're going to do, so we're basically flying a very low formation here, if you like, lazy formation I should say, with the tanker. We're just going to bump our throttle a little bit, so push forward and then drop it back, maybe about half an inch or so, maybe an inch, depending on how far back I am. I'm just trying to match that speed with the tanker. Again, bump it up and then drop it back. So we're actually making fairly consistent and persistent throttle inputs because the aircraft will continue to move forward, and if I want to drop it back, the same thing, drop it back, drop it back again. Now we want to be about 30 feet back and about 50 feet below, so we're a little bit high. I'm going to drop that throttle again. Drop it back, push it in. I'll try and hopefully you can see the throttle inputs here. I haven't got my throttles connected here too, but now we're matching kind of the speed roughly. It's probably going to be about 255, 256 maybe. You can see these constant throttle inputs. And we're probably pretty good here for alerting the tanker that we're here and looking for that that call on the radio. Let them know that we're ready for pre-contact and get approval. So you can see little gentle inputs here. We're just flying that nacelle on that right hand side a little fast here. Just drop it back a little bit, bump it up a little bit, drop it back a little bit. Right, let's see if we can get the tanker to pre-contact. And a little wobbly there as a little bit of speed drop there too. Sometimes I haven't got the radios set up in a way that I can use them easily, but alright, let's go pre-contact.
Ready, pre-contact.
Cleared contact.
So it's always going to be, excuse me, the left-hand nacelle that you refuel from when you're by yourself, and we're going to be a little bit below it, and we're going to try and drive through it. And I'm a little off here. Sometimes I can do this in one shot without, but I'm not aiming for the basket really. I'm looking at the basket, but it's more of a periphery. I'm really trying to focus on keeping level with the tanker itself. I'm just trying to line up with where the basket is rather than trying to chase the basket. And we could probably push through here. We'll leave it at this speed, see if we can just put a real tiny input. So oops, we got a little. Yeah, we're not going to connect there, are we? Oh. So we'll just pull back along the stick there. It's a little off on the angle there, as you saw. So let's drop back here, and then now you're starting to anticipate needing to bump up the power again to maintain. So it is kind of an, it's kind of an exercise, and you can see there's really low inputs here. Little small adjustments. And my elbows are actually resting on the armrest of the chair here. It's got a little out of sync there. So I'll drop back the throttle here. This is about where we want to be here too. You just keep that nacelle when you do get it connected. We want to keep it in the HUD right about sort of there where it is right now. I'm going to bump up the engines there again. So just gently doing it. We'll plug till we get about 10,000.
Break away, break away,
I don't know why it does that, but oops. It's going to drop off the speed. We want to drive into that basket. Apparently now I can't do it while I'm talking. So let's bump up the throttles here again. And then drop it back a little bit. Just so that we're moving forward. I'm a little off here again. Should be on the right hand side there. I might be able to drive it right in. Oops, I chased the basket there.
Break away, break away, break away.
See that new propeller visual too, it's kind of cool. See how easy it is to get out of sync as well. Oops, I did it again.
Break away, break away, break away. Break away, break away, break away.
Okay, there we go.
Contact.
Got connected.
You're taking fuel.
And we're just a little too fast there. Bump that throttle back up again immediately. A little high here, but we'll accept this for now. Just try not to get out of sync here. And it takes a little bit to settle down again as well, you know, like as you push through there. Just be cognizant of that. Roll on, roll off. Roll on, roll off. Drop the speed back a little bit. Roll on, roll off. Very, very fine. Roll on, roll off. Little fine throttle. Movements now. You know, sometimes you connect right up straight away. Other times it's like a little bit of a fight like it was there. I was struggling a little bit, focusing on the wrong things, trying to do too many things at once. Talking and directing at the same time. I feel like. There we go, very fine movements. Very fine movements. So that we're not getting out of sync. As soon as you start getting out of sync, and you try to correct it too much, you're gonna end up in trouble. It's really hard not to do that. We'll roll on, roll off. So I'm a little bit right of where I should be. Oops. And that's where it gets tricky. And then you got to remember to do the throttle as well, so that you're not, you know. Of course, as soon as you do the throttle a little bit, you're going to gain a little bit of lift as well. So you got to constantly adjust it. Hopefully that's making sense there. We're actually looking really good on fuel, so at this point, you know, we could probably disconnect if we so chose. So I wanted to show you less than perfect, just because, you know, it's not something that necessarily comes easy, and you don't hit it necessarily every single time, and you can see it very easily to overcorrect. You're just very fine movements. Every time you're doing something, you have to correct it. Make sure you're not overcooking it. So other than that, I'm pretty happy with that, especially since I'm talking at the same time. I'm trying to concentrate. But you can see this, the stick shouldn't be moving around all that much. It's mostly the throttle. And with how slow we're going, it's actually not too difficult to maintain that speed. The the challenge actually is staying that slow. And there's obviously a little bit of play. There we go. So we're probably done here. I think that's about the maximum amount of fuel that we can take there with our configuration. So let's abort the refuel.
Abort rejoin.
Try to not get wild here on the stick. Check our way is clear since we're up by ourselves. And you saw that there was no rudder movements there either. I didn't need to use the rudder. I believe in the F-14 what needs to happen is to make the aircraft go to the right rather than using the stick like that. You actually pop up, and you can see if I do that, I can do it with this aircraft, but as you do that right rudder, it actually lifts that probe at the same time as you're dropping the wing to the left a little bit. According to, I think it's Ward Carroll, one of the new YouTubers who's doing a lot of stuff on the F-14 right now. So again, a little interesting technique. Okay, so we can close the probe here now. And we'll turn away, increase our throttle. And if you're tired, like I'm getting a little hungry right now and I need a break, that's going to have a little impact on your concentration levels. So just be aware of that. If you're getting frustrated, take a break. You do need to be relaxed to be able to do it. And I'm not really using my whole hand to make those adjustments like that. I'm using just, very gentle pressure on the stick. I'm basically just using my thumb and forefinger to make those adjustments so that I don't ham-fist it, which is really easy to do. And yeah, I think that should do it. I hope that makes sense, and if you have questions or comments that are productive, feel free to put them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, of course. This is Prickly Hedgehog out. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.